I hope you're ready for some ill logic. Last time we went over week 2 of the Whipper Club League and our battle against Joe8 and the Akron Agrons. Please go check that video out first if you have not done so already, as I went over the team builder as well as the battle, which, spoiler alert, the Buffalo Bouffalant emerged victorious again with a 5-0 win on the back of Kingler to bring our overall record to 2-0. This week, as you have probably already guessed, we are taking on the 1-1 Close Combat Club, coached by John, aka Hitmonjon. I have quite the history with John, as he defeated me in the regular season in both seasons 2 and 3, the monotype season and the VGC season, of course, before I finally broke through and got the W in the semifinals of season 3 with my VGC roster in what was probably my favorite set I have played to date in the Whipper Club League. But with that, you already know he's a threat, so this may be a new format to him, but he's definitely not someone to underestimate or sleep on. We do have the upper hand in experience, but we'll see where it goes. So, as always, we'll be starting off with the team builder, followed by the battle. Timestamps will be in the description. So there's a definite trend with this team John has drafted. Let's see if you can spot it. He's got Virizion, Mimikyu, Goodra, Poltegeist, Eldegoss as a Dynamax candidate, Incineroar, Toxapex, Steelix, Wishiwashi as his other Dynamax candidate, and the kill leader for his team, and Aromatisse. Yes, the name of the game is Bulk, with a side of Sweeping Ghosts, but do not underestimate the different ways that this team can be used. I think it's overall a pretty positive matchup for me, though. As far as the worst Pokemon go, I think we have to start with the Eldegoss, which is also, unfortunately, his only hazard removal with Rapid Spin. Eldegoss gets shut down hard by a couple key targets like Celebi and Aegislash, and is overall just a worse Dynamax target than Wishiwashi for this week. Next, Poltegeist always needs to be looked at with its potential to Shell Smash unsuspecting teams, but I'm not sure it's the best in this week between Sucker Punch, Dugtrio, Shadow Sneak, Aegislash, and the biggest jam of them, a Scrafty, which is only taking about 40% from Giga Drain even after the Shell Smash setup. Maybe not the best matchup. We can say the similar thing about Virizion, who does have use in hitting Kyurem Black and maybe a couple of others, but also has hard stops in the forms of Celebi and Aegislash, to which it can do absolutely nothing. Finally, though it may sound strange to say, Toxapex may not necessarily have the greatest matchup here, aside from my telling everyone in the league prior to this match that I would bring 6 Pokemon that could beat Toxapex. I think I can kind of back up that statement. It really isn't that far-fetched. I can absorb Toxic Spikes pretty easily, stop its recovery, I can hit it super effectively with stab moves from half my team. I don't really see it doing that well overall here. As for the 6 I expect to come the most, I'm going to start with the Mon at the bottom, Aromatisse. This bulky fairy type can cause a lot of problems, mostly with cleric options, as things like Wish and Aromatherapy can super punish my team, and its objective of wearing down his team. It's also strong enough to wield a Nasty Plot set, or even run Trick Room to turn the tables on the speed advantage that I have, but it really can't do all of these things at once, so the sooner I figure out what it's doing, the better. Next up is Wishiwashi, who again can Dynamax and kind of wreck if it gets its moves correct. Ice Beam can stop things like Celebi, Scald can hit Rotom, and Earthquake, things like Aegislash, which with just those 3 moves alone, it punches a bunch of holes in my team. It is still a prediction game though, so expect to see me switch around this thing, get myself into a better position. Still, its strength and bulkiness cannot be underestimated, especially after it gets off a Dynamax. Next up is Steelix, who has pretty good typing and bulk all around with this matchup in particular, I think, along with access to something like Stealth Rock. This is another Mon that could, with the right coverage and prediction, start ripping holes through my team. I do think the rocks are the biggest thing here for sure, as if nothing else, I expect it to come for that. It's a little bit tougher for me to remove the rocks without removing any hazards that I'm setting up on his field that I think I need to be taking advantage of. Mimikyu is a monstrous Tier 1 Pokemon that can definitely stop a setup threat with something as simple as Disguise and something like a Will-O-Wisp or a Crit Shadow Claw or a Shadow Sneak or... Yeah, it's pretty one-dimensional Pokemon, but very few teams have answers to that one dimension. It's got amazing typing and speed, 1 point faster than my Kyurem, of course, and hit it with a Play Rough. It could theoretically claim a kill every time it comes in, given the right predictions. Its coverage is pretty darn good. It can even run something like Wood Hammer for my Seismitoad, and its speed is decent, but its bulk is... it's just okay. The strength behind those moves, it can catch you off guard, but it kind of relies on the Life Orb. There's a lot to this. I'm not sure it's going to be the best, but we'll kind of see. Next up, Goodra. I've seen him bring a couple of very devastating sets with the Goodra. I think it does a lot of different things. The coverage it brings is incredible. The natural bulk it has is incredible. And should you choose to augment either the speed or the power or the bulk with an item, that's going to be a big issue. I definitely need to get rid of this thing's item or put it on a timer as soon as possible. Finally, Incineroar is an absolute must-bring for his team, considering its pivoting potentials and fantastic typing. I've already mentioned how things like Aegislash and Celebi stop a lot of his threats, but Incineroar hits both of them super effectively with either stab move. It's very tough to deal with, so my game plan must necessarily revolve around figuring out its item and wearing it down. Overall, again, a very tanky team, and his last match was a stall fest that lasted well over a half hour, which resulted in his victory. I built my team with this in mind, so let's go over the four I'm not bringing first. And we're going to start with Kingler. The hero of Week 2 will not be making another appearance this week, as way too many threats can stop its sweep in its tracks. It's somewhat similar with Seismitoad heroes, multiple grass types to potentially contend with, even if I don't think they're that likely to come, as well as plenty of toxic tactics. It deserves consideration as a very good check to things like Incineroar and Wishy-Washy, which can give the rest of my team some trouble, but I'm not sure it does quite enough. Excelgor is something I really wanted to try to bring for spikes that are very difficult for him to remove, as well as maybe a final Gambit that can smash through stall in one fell swoop, imagining outspeeding that Toxapex with its naturally somewhat low base HP and just one-shotting it with an Excelgor, similar to what we did with the Corviknight in Week 1. However, the chances to set up spikes in the first place aren't that numerous, and I don't like giving up momentum so easily. Despite having things like U-turn and Memento being available, I think I could get a little bit more out of those turns. Finally, you may be very surprised to hear this, but I'm going to be leaving Kyurem Black on the bench this week. The long story short is that the two Pokemon he has that are faster both hit super effectively with stab moves, so even if Kyurem is an amazing breaker or brig, he will have multiple ways he can try and deal with it. That said, if I don't bring Kyurem Black, I am assuming he's going to try to over-prepare for it, and I can take advantage of that with many suboptimal brings on his end. Again, maybe not necessarily the best idea straight up, not to bring my best Pokemon or my first round pick, but it's both a match that I can bring 6 great Pokemon to aside from it, and it can force what could be a straightforward team to bring things that won't nearly be as useful because Kyurem Black isn't there. Maybe a reach, maybe not. Let's decide when you see the team that has been assembled for this week's match. So to start, I want to just say that the strategy for this week is to beat stall, as John's last match again went for so long, and I'm very intrigued by the idea of bringing something that is completely opposite to what I brought last week with the Hyper Offense. So as opposed to having things like Dual Screed Rotom and 3 different setup mons, I'm going to call this team a Stall Breaker Stall team. That is a stall team that can punch holes through the opponent's team with things like Poison, Rocks, Knockoff, the Dynamax, Momentum moves, things like that. So what could be better at doing that than this relatively standard sub-toxic Aegislash? Looking at his team, he really only has a couple of even possible switch-ins, starting with Incineroar, of course, who needs to get toxic to ASAP anyways. This set is designed to beat things like that, and Goodra, who think they can just switch in and hit me hard. I say no, with EVs meant for Substitute to take on a Toxapex Scald while in Blade form, and the defense is honestly just to even out the defenses. I like having those even numbers there. And the extra 4 speed, of course, outspeeds Incineroar and Eldegoss if they do not invest anything in speed. Shadow Ball hits harder than you may think, and the chance to get a special defense drop can force out something like Toxapex or Steelix, who can't get poisoned, or set up a positive switch into something else and just keep up the pressure. And it's overall pretty standard, but it truly does run Rampage on his team. So let's go over Celebi next. And its set of Stealth Rocks, U-turn, Future Sight, and Recover. Very simply, get up rocks early and U-turn around while taking advantage of the switches the team forces with Future Sight. The EVs let me survive 2 Jolly Life Orb Mimikyu Shadow Claws, which can let me just do something like Future Sight and U-turn out to break its disguise. And it can also survive 2 modest max special attack Goodra Flamethrowers. And it's relatively simple, but Celebi and Aegislash have such good typings, natural bulk, they don't need to get too fancy. They'll have plenty of opportunities to switch in, switch out, switch around, abuse things like U-turn, the Leftovers recovery, the Recover recovery. It should be relatively simple. And speaking of simple and switching around, we've got a Rotom-Heat here. Another relatively standard set with Volt Switch, Overheat, Nasty Plot, and Toxic. Another possible Toxic user for the switches that need to get Toxic, like Incineroar and Goodra. Goodra especially being a nice general stop to this mon. The speed is for that Goodra at max speed, and the rest goes into HP with summon special defense to better live things like Scald from Toxapex. Again, it's super simple, but I like the U-turn Volt Switch we've going on here from our Tier 2s, with backup to KO things like Steelix with ease from Overheat. Perhaps the most out there set we've got this week is going to be Rockfeller, the Galarian Weezing, which has Infestation, along with the Will-O-Wisp, Taunt, and Strange Team, and max defenses. Infestation and Taunt should combine to beat Toxapex 1v1, plus Neutralizing Gas to negate the Regenerator buff should it live and switch out. There really isn't anything else that Neutralizing Gas helps with aside from the 2 Regenerator mons he has, but Levitate really doesn't help at all, as Steelix can already hit super effectively with Iron Head, and I don't really anticipate any other ground moves coming in. That said, we can still burn the Steelix should it be the decisive switch in, as well as Taunt it to prevent rocks. Seriously, Taunt is so good in this matchup, I believe so strongly that the debut of Scrafty will also include Taunt on it, along with Knockoff, Super Fang, and Rest. Again, Taunt can be very useful to stop things like recovery moves, but the 2 keys are the Dark typing and Knockoff. I mentioned before how deadly Poltegeist can be. Poltegeist is stopped super hard in its tracks, as you can't even really Will-O-Wisp, with Shedskin being an option to remove the burn from it. Shedskin synergizes not just with Rest, but that as well as a Toxic from something else, so I really like the idea of Rest and Shedskin in this matchup. Toxapex without a Black Sludge also will definitely die to a Weezing that can Trap Taunt and burn it, so the quicker I can knock things off, the better. Imagine the Incineroar without its boots. Imagine the Steelix without its offensive item. Imagine the Goodra without its Specs or Scarf. Getting Knockoff off onto a bunch of different targets is super critical. Plus, I can follow up any chip that this thing does with a Super Fang, which again can hit some of those targets a lot harder than Knockoff could. If, for example, I predict an Aromatisse to come in, I can get a Super Fang off very easily and quickly, taunt it. I actually have enough bulk also to survive an Aromatisse Moonblast. So I have a lot of different options, and that's the main goal for this Pokemon, is to have a bunch of options, be able to use any of these moves basically, and be able to succeed with it and do something that's effective. Finally, we have Alolan Dugtrio making its debut as well, with a Life Orb and a set of Toxic, Earthquake, Iron Head, and Sucker Punch. It's got enough speed for Virizion, of course, as well as priority for Poltegeist after a Shell Smash. Admittedly, a lot of things need a bit of chip before Dugtrio can put in the work, but it could very much be worth it. Basically, if everything's down to about 75% or so, Dougie can go in and sweep, or at least break, or theoretically can put in quite a bit of work. I definitely consider putting Stone Edge on here to activate Sand Force and snag some of those KOs, but I thought the 3 attacks on here were more important. I also tried to fit Aerial Ace in on there for the Virizion, but I figured I have some key switch-ins already in the forms of Aegislash and Celebi that can switch in every single time to that Virizion. I also like the idea of having Toxic on there for the option to max guard in an emergency. Say Wishy-Washy's 2 turns in, I just need to stall out 1 more turn. Yeah, maybe it's not the right call, but we'll see. Actually, why don't we check right now and see if that came into play in the battle. So, start of the battle in Team Preview, I see no Toxapex and no Mimikyu. Neither Tier 1 Pokemon from his side came, as well as no Eldegoss, which means no hazard removal, and no Aromatisse, which means no Trick Room, and neither Fairy type is present. Scrafty needs to be preserved a little bit for the Poltegeist, but without the Fairy types there to threaten it, it gets so much better. Similarly, Aegislash should absolutely go in this matchup. I just need to weaken or take care of the Incineroar, and the path to victory should become clear. That being said, I don't really want him to have the easy anti-lead with Incineroar, so I won't be starting with Celebi and its Rocks option, but instead I'm going to pick Scrafty as my start here. So we have a couple of different options here. I can of course go for a Knockoff, but more importantly I could go for a Taunt if I think he's going to set up Rocks. Otherwise I have a very safe switch into my own Celebi. He doesn't have any easy pivoting moves, and I could get up my own Rocks on turn 2. It's kind of a 50-50, and I decided to go for the safe play and go into Celebi, which does indeed give him his Rocks. I'm obviously going to go for my Rocks on the next turn, but it's kind of interesting that he chooses to switch in the Poltegeist this early. I'm not really sure what kind of set he was expecting from the Celebi, maybe a setup set or something that he himself could have used and set up, but I'm not really sure that I can get up my Rocks for free, so that's very crucial. Again, if this thing has a Focus Sash or something, I can break that. Getting the Rocks up as early as possible, definitely safe, so I think it's relatively safe to U-turn out though too, as I also get a little bit lucky, and the Incineroar comes in right now, shows it doesn't have boots, and takes a quarter of its health from Stealth Rocks. So again, I can make the easy U-turn out here. The original goal was to break the sash of the Poltegeist and bring in Scrafty, but now Scrafty can come in relatively free. I don't see him doing too much to the Scrafty here. So I'm just going to go here and click knockoff on something as per my game plan originally. Parting Shot, it doesn't matter that much. He makes an interesting switch into Wishy-Washy, which again is going to take 12% on entry, and knocking off a very important and interesting item in Weakness Policy. That's really, really interesting that he would bring Weakness Policy here and perhaps try to set up and sweep that way. I only have one move on my whole team that could proc it, although I could have obviously brought a Grass move on Celebi or Freeze Dry on the Kyurem, which would be super interesting. So it may have been better to, kind of wish I'd been able to get the knockoff off in the Incineroar, but I really don't see too much of an issue here trying to do this. I don't see him doing too much again, and my lowered stats don't matter much if I Super Fang, but he goes for an aggressive play here and Dynamaxes right away. Super Fang, of course, if you don't know the mechanic, Dynamax is a little bit weird, but essentially imagine that there's an extra bar on top of the 100% bar that he already had. So instead of doing half, it's going to do a quarter or half of the half that's available. As he does go for Max Quake, raises special defense, and it only does 32% because Scrafty is super bulky. I decided to risk the Max Hailstorm here as well and go into Celebi, and I'm able to eat up the Max Geyser as well with these 26%. It's enough to do something like break a sub, but I'm not terribly concerned. I also know I can live another Max Hailstorm or just go for Recover, but he makes the switch, ending his Dynamax early to go out into the Incineroar, and I'm back up to 100%. So, thought process here is a little interesting. I'm a little concerned as to why he keeps bringing the Incineroar onto the Celebi. Obviously, it's a decent or good matchup, but it seemed like maybe a better way to get in something like the Goodra, so I keep thinking, oh, well, maybe the Incineroar can outspeed me, and I just kind of have the idea of a Scarf Incineroar in my head here, so that's a possible reason why he was able to do that so easily. So I'm just going to go out into my Weezing and take the knockoff. It's only 11% because of the fairy typing. I do lose my recovery, which it could matter a little bit, but I don't have that many options to come take knockoff either. So I think that's fine. He Parting Shots out, which reveals, of course, he was not Scarfed at all in the first place. Goes out into Steelix, but I do at least get a taunt off on the Steelix. And it also shows that the Incineroar does at least have some speed investment, as Weezing did not outspeed it with its 4 speed EVs. So I have a relatively safe switch in here as well, going back into Celebi, and I'm also very surprised that Ironhead only doing 14%, shows me that this thing could be very bulky potentially. It is going to go out into Goodra as I get to set up a Future Sight. I can start chipping things down here a little bit, and because I don't know that the Incineroar doesn't have boots, even if it does come in to take the Future Sight, just getting rocks to activate on it multiple times is definitely worth it. It kind of forces it to come in, frankly, and that's exactly what I want to do. I want to wear that Incineroar down first and foremost because it's the hard stop to something like Aegislash or Celebi from just stalling out his entire team. So I go into the Rotom here, take the incoming Fire move, which does miss and is super unfortunate. Not sure how much it matters in the grand scheme of things, but we'll kind of get into that a little bit. Knowing the Future Sight's coming in, of course, his 2 options are to stay in or go Incineroar, so I think the best neutral ground play is going to be Toxic, which does connect onto the Incineroar. As it does come in, it takes the Rock's chip damage again, and it reveals a Figgy Berry, so I thought that could be a possibility if he wasn't Scarfed, just having the Pinch Berry there. So after the poison, he's going to be down to 44% after taking the Future Sight damage, of course. I kind of make a bold prediction that he might switch out here and go for the Nasty Plot. He does knock off my leftovers, and I have another item that's gone, but that should be just fine, as Volt Switch will now be able to KO. It was not in range before, and we kind of get a neutral switch here, and as he's able to go for Isyan on Scrafty. So that was the first KO of the game on turn 15, but in my mind it really didn't feel that way. I felt pretty comfortable, confident, in control. Sure, I've lost a couple items on a couple of my tankier members, but the 2 members that matter the most in tanking, that is the Aegislash and the Celebi, remain basically untouched. I haven't revealed anything about the Aegislash. The Celebi is pretty healthy, and I still feel in control despite this happening, so Knowing that Virizion would come in here, not a problem at all, as I just went over the two Pokemon that stop it the most, and it's going to be Aegislash, as it comes in, of course, on the fighting move Close Combat. Goodra's going to be the switch in as a substitute, and he's probably crying, as we may understand or know exactly what is going to happen. Get a little bit lucky here too, as he misses another Fire Blast. That is 0 for 2 right now, as I connect on my Toxic. Again, very unfortunate, but I don't think it makes that big of an impact, knowing that, of course, I can stall out this thing out a little bit with something like King's Shield for another turn of Toxic damage. The only difference would be that I'm not behind a substitute. This really speeds the game up more than anything. I could obviously go out into the Rotom. It may be able to eat up a hit, at least get a little bit of chip damage, so it may be able to net him a KO, that miss, but ultimately, I don't know how much it matters in the grand scheme of the battle. He misses another Fire Blast, going 0 for 3. This one didn't matter at all, of course, because I had a substitute prepared to come in, so it only saved me about 25% health, but still, go for King's Shield, as he, frustrated, obviously, will go into the Wishy-Washy. So, I definitely understand the frustration, but I'm just going to click Shadow Ball here. It will not KO, but it will get a very key special defense drop, and gets the rest out of him, so showing that not Toxicking was the play anyways. It's now, unfortunately, because of that drop, this is also a 2-hit KO on the Wishy-Washy. I'm able to end the encounter behind a substitute again as he goes into Goodra. So I got another bit of hacks going into my way, but I'm not really sure how much this mattered either. We saw it was probably going to a 3-hit KO anyways, considering the turns of sleep that would be there. The odds of me getting that special defense drop sooner or later, for one thing, would have made this more possible, and two, I don't really see any other options for it other than to just let it go down. I guess he could have tried to take out the sub there, but maybe he also wasn't prepared for how much damage the Shadow Ball was going to. I don't think I'd revealed it at that point either, so again, pretty unfortunate, but with the already being 3-hit KO'd and the inability to switch out, really not sure. It just seems like this set was such a good call. I came up with this basically as soon as I saw the Incineroar coming, and I could not have imagined how much work this would put in. So either way, in comes the Goodra to take some more damage. Again, rack up a little bit more of the toxic damage. Has been able to protect from the Fire Blast. We'll finally get a Fire Blast to connect and hit my substitute. But of course it doesn't matter because I can just set up another one knowing how many turns of Toxic are left, King Shield on the final hit, and once again remain with a substitute up after taking down 2 Pokemon, one through Toxic, the other one through the Shadow Ball. As then comes the Poltegeist, potentially breaking a Focus Sash. It does Shell Smash in my face. And it reveals itself to be White Herb, which is a little interesting, and it does survive on 1 HP. We get another drop, which is pretty funny. The important thing, of course, though, is that he's able to end the exchange by getting rid of the substitute, and I'm able to take out the Poltegeist, so we are now up 6-2. Verizion's going to come in. I don't see it doing too much. Leaf Blade, even from the set that he's got, 28%, and I'm able to put the final timer on the board on Virizion there with the Toxic. You're able to get another King's Shield off just to stall it a little bit, lower its attack. And admittedly, from here, all the other switching that is done is just posturing in an attempt to bring in Alola and Dugtrio, who never got a chance to come in, even in the end. The Steelix had coverage for it, obviously the Virizion had coverage for it, and nothing was chipped that much for it. It really was unnecessary, but I kind of gave in to the crowd and really wanted to show off the Alola and Dugtrio just a little bit. But it was ultimately unnecessary, as we already know that Aegislash is going to destroy the last 2 members. Steelix, another miss, misses the Toxic there, which is so unfortunate. However, with the Toxic and then finally revealing Body Press, we actually find out that Steelix never had a ground move in the first place, and it could never touch the Aegislash at all. So all I can really do here is drop a little bit, seeing the Body Press coming in, and think, I'm not really sure I can find a chance to bring in the Dugtrio. I apologize if this seemed BM at all. I was trying to at least show off Dugtrio a little bit, see why I brought it in the first place, but the stall was so strong, unfortunately. So again, there's really not too much point in this moving around. Obviously, I can be immune to Toxic with the Weezing. Obviously, I can recover the Toxic status with Natural Cure. So I'm really not even getting punished for it that much. But I do see the Steelix slowly recovering a little bit of health. So Celebi pretty much does the same thing as Aegislash, just a little bit different. But finally here on turn 43, I decided enough's enough. Let's you turn out Cure the Poison, of course, and go out into Aegislash, and let's end things properly. I don't think anyone here can do anything to Aegislash, as we're going to see how much the Shadow Ball does, and it is in fact an easy 37%. That's 2 KO from that range, no questions asked. Even with the Future Sight, it's not doing that much. So obviously I can just click Shadow Ball a couple times. I'm only going to do 18% back to me. 2 Shadow Balls will finish up the match and bring us a 6-0 victory against someone who could be considered my nemesis in these leagues, John and the Close Combat Club. So good game to John. I am sorry I ended up bringing basically a perfect counter team to what you brought. I did not manage to get an interview with John, but he did express that he didn't think it would be possible to outstall the offense that my team was able to produce, and thus brought a counter offense team for it. As it went to stall breaking, stall team, it matched up perfectly, and he really could not break through anything. So maybe Kieran Black staying on the bench this week was a good thing, or at least a sign that my mindset was perfectly prepared for what he was trying to do. And it definitely feels like he brought a lot of prep for it between what appeared to be a choiced Goodra and Virizion, along with things like Body Press Steelix. So again, good game to John. Next week we've got Clark and the Blessed Walrein, so let's see if that undefeated record can stay through the next week. See ya.